Fantastic. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm here in Cape Town. We have the pleasure of welcoming Clemens Dimpers all the way from Helsinki, Finland, but he has a large South African presence. So I'll let him give his introduction likewise. Our topic today is around AnyLogic. It's an incredible simulation software tool that's been around for many years now. Clemens is a certifiable expert in this field and domain. And so I felt it appropriate, we as the Lean Institute felt it appropriate to give you an introduction to this tool and just how capable it is to do some simulation modeling, digital twins, sandbox type environment, both for operational environments and service environments and many others, of course. So I encourage all the additional research coming off of today, but hopefully you'll be excited by what possibilities exist. I personally went through a nice 5-day training earlier this year on AnyLogic just to reintroduce myself to the functionality, and I believe there are some incredible use cases for our community and for all of your organizations. So Clemens, very briefly, I'll give an introduction. As I said, certifiable expert in this domain, had a master's in physics from the University of Natal and is a registered professional physicist. Since he's left that university, he has founded a number of software companies involved in multi-paradigm data science, modeling and simulation of complex systems, and how these methodologies can enable better decision making. He's been part of several consulting projects, as you can imagine, South Africa, Botswana, India, New Zealand, Finland, and he currently is pursuing a PhD through the University of Pretoria with the Industrial Engineering Department. And so Clemens represents a technical software company, Blue Stallion Technologies. It's based out of South Africa, bluestallion.co.za. And he also founded Polar Analytics, a company registered in Finland, specializing in modeling projects related to bioeconomy and sustainability. So Clemens, thank you so much for your time today. We look forward to hearing from you. Please go ahead and jump in. And pardon me, before we do that, if there are any specific expectations that our audience has of what they'd like to learn today from Clemens or about AnyLogic or anything else related to digital simulation, please put those in the chat now. We'd love to hear from you. And then that way we can advise Clemens of how to guide his discussion. We have some great content, but please let us know any other expectations that you may have for today. And then I'll shout those out as we go through. So Clemens, please go ahead and take it away.
Yes, so thank you for giving me this opportunity. I will try to sort of make best use of my time, but there's actually a lot to share. So what I'd really appreciate, just put something in the comments if you, or just interrupt me if I touch upon something that is of particular interest, so I can then elaborate. Otherwise, we might get right to the end and I didn't really focus on that particular topic. So let me start by sharing my screen. Good. Hopefully you can see this.
We can. Thank you.
Okay, good. So I thought of calling this simulation for improved decision making, which is very general and touch just about every different industry, I guess, but that's quite appropriate for AnyLogic because AnyLogic has a very wide range of potential applications. So let's perhaps start right in the beginning, and that is, what is modeling and why do we really need to do that? Well, in the real world, we quite often are faced with a particular problem that we need to solve. And the question is, well, how do we solve it? So we cannot just sort of try out different alternatives because it's too time consuming or it takes too long. You can't just, buy or lay a new railway track or change a yard layout just to sort of see whether it will work, or even change a warehouse orientation or whatever it is. It's just too expensive. So you must be quite sure that that will actually have the desired effect. And that's why we do modeling. So we create an abstraction of the real world situation. That's a model, and we then solve that model. And then we see how that relates to the real world problem. And very often, or in just about all cases, it isn't just a one cycle process. We typically solve it, see something, we share it with stakeholders, and they say, but wait a second, you forgot about this or that. And then we incorporate that, model that again until it becomes very close to what we observe in the real 3D world. But the benefit is the world of models is a risk-free space. We can try all kinds of different alternatives. I'm quite sure all of you have experienced that you in your company or at a company, and you say, well, why do we do it this way? Why don't we try this or that? And often the reply is, well, we've just always done it that way. And it's sometimes good to look at alternatives. Is it still the best way of doing it? Why did they really decide to do it that way? And if you have a good simulation model or good model, you can then find out and look at that. And what we want to do specifically here is to talk about dynamic simulation models, and that's where AnyLogic comes in. But before delving into that, let me just try to maybe clarify a few of these terms, because people very often talk about it these days. So what's the difference between animation, emulation, and simulation? Well, animation is something you would typically create just to visualize certain operations. So there's nothing behind it. It's just nice pictures. It's visual only. And it's really for people to orientate themselves to show other people maybe a new warehouse that will be built, what it would look like. Emulation is used very often with material robotics manufacturing systems. So it's to test software and hardware systems in the planning of certain operations. And it is functionally accurate. That is really how the equipment will function. And then lastly, we get to simulation. And an example of that is, for instance, to look at warehouse performance and analyze and optimize that. And that is really behaviorally accurate. And one can make real decisions on that, because it is not just the pictures, it is really the logic behind the pictures. And if you look at just the animation and a simulation, you might not see the differences, because both might create a picture of the 3D environment. But with the simulation, you have all the operational requirements and logic behind it. So, for instance, looking at forklift traffic during peak hours. So that is really simulation. Right. So the most popular modeling tool that all of you have used is Excel. So Excel is a modeling tool because we have certain data that we input in the tool. There's certain calculations that take place because we have certain formulas or macros, and then we get output. And Excel is very good for analytical solutions, but it isn't really good for dynamic simulation because there are many feedback loops. It is not a linear system. And what we typically do with a dynamic simulation model, we also need data as an input. We have the model. And then what we do is we observe how the state of the model change over time. So in a way, it's a little bit like watching a movie that shows us a particular future point. And then what we can also do is to look at other possible future times, because in dynamic simulation models, there's most of the time, if not always, some randomness built in, some stochastic processes, because a forklift might break down, a machine might, not operate at full specification, and that's going to have a problem with the number of widgets that can be made, or whatever the case is. So we can run the simulation model multiple times and then look at the different potential outputs. And the real value of this is to then track it through time, and at every key moment see what is the problem that caused this, and then come to a much better insight. Whereas if we use something like a typical analytical tool, it will just give you the answer at the end, and you don't know exactly what happened on the way there. So let me perhaps now move a little bit closer to AnyLogic and tell you what that tool does. What it's not, first of all, it is not a detailed engineering physical modeling tool, similar to, for instance, MATLAB, Simulink, some fluid flow calculations, similar to Wolfram System Modeler or even Wolfram Mathematica. It isn't that. It looks at business solutions. So the kind of thing that you can model with this tool would be very detailed operations, like people walking through check-ins at the airports through security gates, the movement of cranes, the detailed movement of forklifts through a warehouse operation. But then we can also look at smaller scale logistics, maybe the movement of cars or rail yard operations, or the download or the loading of vessels in harbor operations. And then we can even look at larger scale operations where we look at the trade between different countries or continents, or maybe the movements of different products between different warehouses. And then at the top level that we can use AnyLogic for might be at the strategic level, where we look at the competition between different marketplaces. So this is what originally appealed to us about the AnyLogic tool, because as I'll mention just now, we not only distribute the software, but we also do consulting services throughout the world. And if you have one tool that can be used in all these different application areas, it just means it is it's very useful to do that, because you just have to have one tool and you build up a speciality in using that one tool for these various things. So AnyLogic is arguably the leader for dynamic simulation modeling today. There are other products around, but AnyLogic has been consistently taking their market share and shows very good growth. These are some I guess, a couple of year old, so it would have today it's probably even larger than this. But look at the LinkedIn community and the Winter Simulation Conference number of papers that's used for this particular tool. Now, who uses this at industry? The answer is most of the large companies internationally are using AnyLogic. So in different pharma, energy, supply chains, finance, consumer goods, and also the global big consulting companies, they are all using AnyLogic as a tool. And geographically located, AnyLogic is a North American-based company. They have an office in Europe as well, and then they have different partners throughout the world. And our company, Blue Stallion Technologies, covers Africa for product sales, but then also covers the rest of the world for consulting services. And what is quite interesting is there is a lot of interest in AnyLogic from outside South Africa, especially from the north of Africa. We found that AnyLogic has really grown also at universities, where it's being taught to graduate industrial engineers, people in supply chain, and so on, which means companies can then get trained individuals who's already been exposed to the tool. Okay, maybe this is a good time to ask if there's any questions before I sort of delve into the product itself and show you some examples.
Not seeing any questions yet, Clemens, but a quick question in regard to the number of companies and organizations employing AnyLogic. Would you say its capabilities scattered throughout by individuals, or is it a team, or how does that function work within those types of setups?
That depends, because AnyLogic is used in, as far as I personally know, our clients from very large corporates where they have a simulation team or have developed a simulation team around AnyLogic to small, well, the smallest is a one-man operation, or a few people operation where there's one that's the simulation expert.
Understood. There is one other question from Robert. I don't know, Robert, if you're willing to come off mute and share.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you very much to the presenter and the team. My question is on what is the advantage of AnyLogic over Simio, which is also an object-based simulation package, and possibly Arena, but mainly Simio. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. You read my mind, because that is what I'll be covering next. So, most of the modern simulation tools, similar to, let me perhaps move back a couple of years. So, specifically in the South African context, most of the people who used simulation probably 20, 25 years ago was Arena. It was sort of the original kid on the block, and it had most of the market share. And then Arena or Simio not quite evolved from Arena, but the way I understand it, some of the people who were involved with starting Arena or developing that particular software then moved to Simio and then started doing that. And when we originally started in South Africa, everyone was just talking about Simio as the sort of new tool that's been around. And when AnyLogic started, interestingly enough, it started by people when Arena was already very well known and established, but they were originally academics from a university specializing in computer science. And then they sort of put their experience together into a new package, which became AnyLogic. And I'll cover some of these things right now, or very shortly. So most of the tools were really designed to be discrete event modeling tools. They can do 2D, 3D animation, modular development and reuse of components, run different experiments. But what puts AnyLogic aside, as the name actually says, you can do any kind of logic as far as simulation is concerned with this tool. So not just discrete event, but also system dynamics. System dynamics is another type of simulation modeling that's been around for a long time. And AnyLogic has been designed to combine system dynamics with discrete event with agent-based modeling. And when we originally started talking about agent-based modeling, the typical question was, what is that? We've never heard about it. And today, actually, even most of the competitors are either claiming that they are using agent-based modeling, or they've sort of developed some add-on or functionality within their package to support that. But AnyLogic was really the first company with a vision to incorporate all of that at the same time within their software. So what we also have with AnyLogic is particular libraries that's built into the tool. Pedestrian road library, rail process monitoring, fluid library, and material handling. So you don't purchase these separately, it's just part of the package itself. Then what you can also do with AnyLogic is you can also natively do GIS map integration. So it uses OpenStreetMap or your own map provider to be able to do that. And one of the key sort of focus areas of AnyLogic is specifically agent-based modeling, where you where with traditional simulation packages, discrete event, you would have certain entities moving through a flow chart, a certain hierarchy of paths. With agent-based modeling, you build in a certain intelligence into these agents, as we call it, that then could move through your flowchart or can even interact with each other. And that means there's a whole range of new applications that's opened up using AnyLogic. And most importantly, certainly from our consulting perspective too, is you can combine these different programming aspects within one model. So some part of your model might be best described as system dynamics. Maybe if you use a forklift or battery operated vehicle, maybe the draining of the battery can be described as system dynamics because it depends on your movement. But on the other hand, it could also depend on temperature. If it's a very cold climate, the draining of the battery is going to be different than in the summer months, for instance. And then all these batteries together would have certain agent-based characteristics where they might interact with, I don't know, other agents like pedestrians or security personnel. And then you might have certain aspects of the model that is more traditionally discrete event. So you can really combine all of those within one elegant model. And the other aspect is to be able to create reusable objects in your model as libraries. And that is really easy within AnyLogic. And if you want to create digital twins, those kinds of models can really designed in such a way that they can configure themselves and link to very large databases where those databases would then create the model. Because dragging and dropping only really works for very small models. Good, I see there's another question. And just now I'll actually show you some real models.
Yes, if I can come in, it's Robert again. Yeah. My question here would be, how much of programming would need to be done, or one would need to know when they are using AnyLogic, and what sort of programming language would you need to know? Or can you actually build a complex model without having to have a good understanding of programming? Because I think that's one of the issues with these packages. Thank you.
That is a very good question. So the first part is AnyLogic is based on Java, as is mentioned here. So Java is a very popular programming language, and there's really a lot of Java available. So if you ask me this question, I don't know, even 3 years ago, the answer would have been different from the one that I'm giving to you now. And probably if you wait another 2 years, the answer would even be different. So what sort of changed the game in many cases, is the development of ChatGPT, other large language models. So in AnyLogic, you can do many things by just dragging and dropping objects when building a model. And as I'll show just now, then you would typically add some code if you need to for additional functionality. The most important kind of thing to develop, skill that we try to also cover in our training courses, is really how to think how you should design a model and your thought process, rather than get stuck in the very small level of detail. So what you can do is now you can actually ask ChatGPT, I have so many trucks and I want to, I don't know, sum all their travel times together and do this. And I use AnyLogic. And because AnyLogic is such a popular system and there's such a lot of information on Stack Exchange and other online forums, these models now incorporate that kind of knowledge, and it would then suggest, it would give you the code that you can then implement within AnyLogic to do that. So it is much easier to develop models that incorporate some programming these days compared to some years ago. Then probably 2 months ago, in the AnyLogic user conference, AnyLogic gave a talk themselves as part of the conference on where they sort of see the product go and what the sort of user interface might look like. And they demonstrated sort of part of the integration of large language models within the software, to such an extent that you might even in future build the whole model by just giving particular prompts. You say, I want you to build a model that will be able to do this, and the AI will think and then come back with a model. So that is sort of the idea. You still need humans in this loop to make sure it is quite accurate in doing that. So that sort of is a longer answer to what you asked, but the truth of the matter is, if you want to build any digital twin, any really large model, and you want that model to be maintainable, you do need to know or utilize some kind of programming with that. You cannot build a very large model just by dragging and dropping. Well, you can, but it's not very efficient in doing that. The other thing maybe touching, and that's maybe also why you're asking this question, we are aware that, let's just call it, some competitors have sort of created the impression that AnyLogic is really difficult to use. You really need to be expert in programming to be able to use it. So during our last training course, let me just maybe put it this way, we had someone with very extensive skills and background on some of the competing products, and they said, wow, I didn't realize it was so easy to do. I thought you needed a lot of programming skills. So it isn't, you don't need to be a programmer to use AnyLogic. It's not really a barrier. The most important thing is to think about the structure of the model and not this level of detail. And even if you don't know any programming, ChatGPT is there to help and assist. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, I did. Thank you. I'll have a last one at the end so that you can continue.
Okay. Okay, but I'll be very happy to talk in more detail about specifics. I have a colleague who's also used some of the other systems, and he'll be very happy to elaborate on exactly how you can do things. Okay, so very briefly, just touching a few things before I show you some real examples. AnyLogic has for a long time, a couple of years, worked with machine learning and how to incorporate that within the tool. And it also works very well with linking to ERP systems, different databases, different BI tools, and so on. We have some models where we link our simulation, AnyLogic simulation, to some financials that people might have in Excel, for instance. And it would read and write and trigger calculations in Excel, for instance. So it's very, very easy to connect it to other tools. And then also AnyLogic has a cloud, which I'll show you just now, which is a very efficient way of delivering models to end users. And maybe that's a good time to actually show you. So if I go to, first of all, if I go to anylogic.com, this is the company website. And what I suggest you do, so it's called anylogic.com, and let me just move that away. I suggest when you have time, you go to resources. And first of all, what is really good is to have a look at the AnyLogic conference. So this is the last conference that AnyLogic has given, and these are most of these presentations are by companies who actually use AnyLogic commercially. And you can see some of the well-known names there. But I specifically want to show you or mention these talks by AnyLogic themselves, and especially this one, AI with a model and modeler, simulation co-design. So have a look at that. That shows some of their thinking about upcoming skills or features. But then what I also suggest is you can also look at some of the previous conferences. And there might be, there's things in mining, ports and terminals. And in fact, there's even a presentation here by a South African company who did a big model for Transnet, simulating the ports and terminals in South Africa. And there are many more years that you can have a look, and all of these you can watch the videos and get a PDF of the presentation background. So there's a lot of material here, and you can quickly see what might be of interest to you. Then there's also some white papers, and one of these particularly is looking at, where is that? There was one here that looked at different software tools. I don't see that right here, but I can try to get a link to anyone looking at different software tools and simulation tools and functionality. And then there's also many case studies available. So that is the website, but perhaps a more interesting thing is to look at the actual cloud. So if you look at the cloud version of AnyLogic, it's called cloud.anylogic.com. And currently there are many thousands of these simulation models that is available on the cloud. It's freely available to upload your AnyLogic models, and then if you want to share it with people, they can run that. And you can see that there's currently 19,800 models, and there's about 720 in healthcare, 517 manufacturing, supply chains, and so on. So you can explore any of these. And then if you click on the particular model, you can run that model. And it's actually running the model. It's not just running a video of the model. So you can have a 3D, and it is also interactive. You can view it from different perspectives. You can, for instance, look at 2D view of the model, and you can look at the logic of the model. And these are the sort of AnyLogic modeling blocks that you have. So this is one way of consuming or using the models. And then, as you would know, what you would typically do, and I'm not sure this model probably doesn't have that, but there are experiments that you can perform where you might want to vary certain parameters in the model. And you can do that also here. So it allows you to run experiments, not just show you a visual representation of the model. So all of that is available in the AnyLogic cloud. So I suggest explore this and see if there's something of interest that catches your eye. But what I wanted to point out here is, if you look at all these sort of categories, what should really be evident is that AnyLogic hasn't just been designed for one particular application. It really has a very wide application area. One of the things that they can actually show much more of that should be here is mining. So there are a whole bunch of mining operations and simulations too, and we have many South African mining operations that also use. So maybe there should be a mining example here too. Okay, now let me jump into AnyLogic itself and maybe show you what the tool looks like. So this is the sort of design interface of the tool. And one of the ways in which you would typically develop a model is that you get this whole host of different libraries, for instance, process modeling library, and you would then drag sources and sinks onto the main canvas of your library and connect these things up to create a model. There also specifically these material handling libraries, pedestrian, road, rail, and so on. And you can mix and match functionalities between these different libraries, as well as connection to databases, and so on. And then after designing the model, you would typically be running it. And here we can see material handling in a hospital. The idea is you have a hospital with these different beds on different floors, and they produce medical waste. You have to make the beds, you have to get food to it, and so on. And you have these AGVs that would then move through different lifts. You can sort of see that lift going down. Hopefully, maybe I can make this bigger. And this movement throughout the hospital. You can also put a camera on an AGV, which would then follow that, and you can sort of see whereabouts it would move to and so on. And the important thing, obviously, is, well, the logic of the model, but also the statistics, which you would decide on the KPIs and would then add to the model, or have the developer add to the particular model. And one can probably run this in virtual speed. That will then tell you what the utilization of the AGVs are. Maybe you have to decide how many AGVs you really need, and so on. So this model is quite a detailed and visually sort of a visual kind of model, because you want to get an idea of the total operation, or the operation in this whole facility. But there are other models that are developed maybe specifically to get particular answers, and that don't need to be as sort of have as much visual details. And actually, maybe what I need to do then is to just reopen AnyLogic for this particular model. So this is a model that was developed in collaboration with a South African university for a South African company making trains. And this is what the model looks like. So in this model, the operation is to manufacture rail coaches. And there are different number of people working in different jigs that have been configured in the factory. And how it works is a whole basket of initial parts arrive at jig 1, and then the workers would start doing the welding. Other parts arrive at jig 3 and also would start to do the welding. And then the parts would be moved from jig 3 to jig 4, and from jig 1 to jig 2, where yet other parts would arrive, and these parts would then be welded again, and then it would move together to this area. From there, it would move to a final assembly area where the parts from jig 4 and here would then be put together, and then finally the final inspection and assembly would be done. And the question really is, how do we do that? What happens if we share some of the welding equipment between these two jigs? How many workers should there be at each of these stations, and so on? And the real KPI is over here, how many of these rail cars can we then really manufacture? So in this model, there is no pictures of fancy rail cars. It's really just running through the model. And I put the model in virtual speed, so maybe I can just rerun it and a bit faster, so you can see that these workers are busy. Nothing has come in here yet. You can have a look at how many days have passed, or the time that's passed. I made it such that if the jig is busy, it would show red, green if it's not busy, and you can see how many days have passed and the number of carts that's been, or rail wagons that's been assembled. And then what one can do is also look at the stats. And if I rerun this, maybe it's up. Maybe what I can do is to rerun this. And then what we can do is to look at the stats as it runs. So you can then see the worker utilization. gun utilization and so on that happens during this time. But then what one can also do with AnyLogic is you can create experiments. And what I've done in this case is I've created a Monte Carlo experiment of this model, where I then tell AnyLogic, run this experiment 200 times, because obviously there's some stochastic elements built into this, and you can't just run it once and say, okay, that's going to be the output. You have to run it multiple times to get an idea of the variation that you might expect. And in this case, I would then mention which of these parameters should be varied when I run the experiment. In this case, I would then just get a histogram. And what you can notice is when I click run, at the bottom of my screen, it shows all those different processes that's being run. And here you would see the number if manufactured would change every time I run an experiment. I'm going to run about, so far, 100 of them. I think I'm going to run 200 of them. So when it's finished, you would get an idea of, if I were to look at 200 sort of virtual years of manufacturing, what would be the spread in this? And here you can see you're going to manufacture 515.6 on average. There's some chances that it's going to be less, but probably not really less than 500. And these are obviously the important results to get. So you can also run optimization experiments with AnyLogic that I don't really have time to go into. But yeah, so what we have with the model is we would drag and drop these blocks in here. And if I click on any one of these blocks, for instance, that one, if I want to, I can enter some code here. And the kind of code that you would typically enter in AnyLogic would be really simple things like for loops and so on. AnyLogic also allows you with these very easy templates, for instance, to add different kinds of probability functions. Or if you have to read from a database, it has a simple little widget that allows you to insert a database query. Maybe you're not a SQL expert, but you don't have to be. You can just sort of go through this widget, which will then show you how to construct a query, for instance. Good. Any questions?
We have a question coming through from Anton there, Clemens. So what advice do you have for a small company doing mostly manual production without much electronics on the shop floor to start the digitization modeling journey to improve their operational performance?
What I would suggest is you can download the free Personal Learning Edition, the PLE version of AnyLogic. So once again, if I go to anylogic.com, and this is weird, but if you go to anylogic.com, you can download the free PLE version. And even sometimes by building a very simplistic model, it can give you some insights of where there might be certain bottlenecks within your operation. That is what I would suggest. Yeah.
Yep, agreed, Clemens. And that's the edition I've learned on, and it's very useful to a point. And there are many demo environments that you can download from the AnyLogic website that help give you some guidance. And then likewise, Blue Stallion does offer training. So that is a hope for today. If there is true interest that we could set something up between us. And I know Clemens is happy to offer that. So we can follow up after the webinar. The other question briefly is more technical. Is the model available on the cloud, Clemens? And AnyLogic itself as a software platform available on the cloud?
Yes. So AnyLogic is working very hard on using the cloud, not just as an environment where you have running models, but where you can actually build models yourself. So if I go to again at cloud.anylogic.com, fantastic. If I go to log in with our account, oh, and maybe what I should also have mentioned, what we use very, very often in working with companies across the world is if we develop a particular model for them, is to share that model with them so that they can see during the development process, do we understand them correctly? Does it really look, you know, the operation, the output, does it look like what it does look in reality on their factory floor? And it's very simple to do that in AnyLogic, because what we do is we just go to export to the AnyLogic cloud. And if you do that, then it creates that model. And you can share that model either with all the other models, but probably if you do consulting, you only want your client to see it because you have an NDA. So what you can do in that case is then to give them a private link. And let me quickly look at this. So, so if I go to this model here, I can actually play the model. I can It just takes a second to load. This is going to be the new version of AnyLogic that we'll call AnyLogic 9. It's already in technology preview. And what you will see is similar to the palettes that I had before. These are now palettes in your browser, and you can now drag and drop and design your model here in the browser. And then you can also run the model in the browser. So hopefully next year, all these different, you see that is the pedestrian modeling, rail, road, and so on. All of the functionality from the standalone version would be available in the cloud. Some of these icons are grayed out because this hasn't yet happened. But in that case, you'd be able to design models in the cloud as well as run models in the cloud.
Very good. I think, Robert, if you want to chime in with your question here, we are getting short on time, but feel free.
Yes, thank you very much. 3 questions. One, how much is the training that you've been referring to? 2, what sort of teaching resources are available for academics who are teaching simulation modeling in universities? Because I'm one of them. And then 3, that error page that you got when you were trying to open, I don't know what, I was actually getting the same when I tried to open the white papers you referred to in the cloud. So that makes my questions 2, and then the other one is a comment. Thank you.
Okay, let me answer your questions by asking you a question. From which university are you?
University of Botswana.
Okay, so we do not yet have a license there, but in South Africa, we have at most of the universities where they are teaching with AnyLogic. First of all, let me see, and hopefully this will work now. If I open AnyLogic web page, yeah. If you go to resources, it has for academia. And if you click on that, most universities in Africa use the free PLE version to teach their undergraduate students. And then they would purchase a university researcher license to run the very large models. There are various educational and know-how books and webinars and so on. You can click on all of these. And if you go to the books specifically, there's AnyLogic in 3 days, but the one I really recommend is the big book of simulation modeling. You get most of the chapters in PDF format, and then also the art of process-centric modeling with AnyLogic. But if you want to reach out later, I'll be happy to sort of answer these in detail. We do have public training that we run in South Africa. Well, it's actually online training, so it's open to anyone worldwide. And we are most likely going to have our next training course in January or February next year. So there are also special pricing for academics. I just have to check those details. So how our training differs from the standard training that AnyLogic gives is we split it over 12 sessions, 12 different days or sessions of about 2 hours a day, so that there's enough time for you to do some homework, ask questions. We record these, you can play it back. And we also use a platform so that you can ask questions to us or other delegates sort of throughout the time, and you don't always have to use email because the inboxes just get a bit too full. So I can also share that info. Maybe just very briefly, I can mention something that I haven't really touched on, and that is AnyLogic has another product called AnyLogistics. So AnyLogic is a general simulation modeling tool, and you can build just about any kind of simulation project with that. AnyLogistics is specifically targeted at logistics applications. The difference between the products is that AnyLogistics is also very easy to use, and the typical user would be someone who's involved in the supply chain in a company, because most of the data is entered via sort of Excel-like tabular format. They don't need to know anything about conducting experiments, constructing models, anything like that. They just enter the data or import the data. AnyLogistics takes care of the rest and then show you the results, including financial KPIs. AnyLogic is a much more open system, and you can do just about anything you want to, but it takes more effort in that you have to program the routes, how things travel, what times, the schedules, and whatever. You have to do that yourself. But what you can do with AnyLogic, for instance, is you can model what happens within 4 walls of an operation. So it's more flexible in that way. But some companies are logistics companies, and they're not interested in that amount of detail. They're just interested in their supply chain and how they're going to import various goods in or out of a particular country, and they would choose AnyLogistics. But yeah.
So Clemens, we want to respect your time and everyone's time here. We're at the top of the hour. Maybe one final question as a follow-up. Do we have advanced training planned anytime soon? Do you have that as Blue Stallion? She's already done basic training, it sounds like.
So we don't have we can custom make training. Our training is the same certificate-based training from AnyLogic, but what we typically do is we include in our training sort of advanced connection to databases, sort of more practical details. Since we use the package ourselves to do consulting, how to build particular models, the kind of things to bear in mind. So in a way, you can say even our basic training has some advanced aspects to that, but we can tailor make something if there's a particular demand.
Understood. Yes, some positive feedback. I think if no other questions, we'll give it a moment here, but we want to thank you again, Clemens, for sharing with us. Hopefully got everybody excited about some possibilities, and we know there'll be follow-up, so we'll send out an email with Clemens's contact information and details and some follow-up there along with the link to this recording. But thank you again for joining us today.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
All the best.
Thanks.
Thank you.